My name is Lou Rosado Birch. I'm the Connecticut Program Director for Citizens Campaign for the Environment. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. We have a great program for you this evening with a number of exciting guest speakers. We're here to talk about what's happening in Connecticut on the issue of PFAS, the infamous forever chemicals that you all have heard so much about recently in the news. And so, yeah, we have a great program tonight. We're going to be hearing from a few experts from Citizens Campaign for the Environment and one of our sister organizations, Clean Water Action, as well as State Representative Jonathan Steinberg from the Connecticut General Assembly, and finally, last but certainly not least, Kyla Bennet from PEER, Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility. And so I'm just going to go through a quick round of introductions of all of our panelists tonight. I'm going to ask everyone to, your chat has been disabled, so if you have any questions for the panelists, please put them in the chat, the Q&A box, and I will go through and read those questions as they come up during the Q&A panel at the end. But first we have short presentations from each of our speakers, starting with Adrian Esposito. Adrian is the Executive Director for Citizens Campaign for the Environment. She's been with us in that role since 2004. She majored in geology and environmental science at CW Post. Her expertise includes water quality protection, toxic pollution prevention, renewable energy, and a wide range of other important issues. She helped lead the charge in New York State to obtain the nation's strictest drinking water standard for PFOS and PFOA, and continues to work to make sure that standard is enforced by water suppliers across the state. Jonathan Steinberg is here with us today. Welcome, Jonathan. He serves as state representative in the 136th Assembly District of Westport and is now serving his 6th term in the Assembly. He is the House Chair of the Legislature's Public Health Committee. He also serves on the Energy and Technology and Transportation Committees. As Chair of Public Health, Jonathan was one of the original sponsors of the PFAS bill that passed the Assembly this year, and one of the chief architects of that legislation, and so we look forward to hearing from him today. Ann Hulick is with us. Hi, Ann. She's the Connecticut Director of Clean Water Action and Clean Water Fund. She focuses on passing health protective policies aimed at mitigating climate change, protecting our waters, and reducing exposure to toxic chemicals. She started her career as a critical care nurse and then as a nursing director. She holds a BSN from the University of Hartford and an MS in administration from UConn. She pursued a Juris Doctorate in order to combine environmental health policy and the law, and was admitted to the CT bar in 2007. Thanks for being with us. And again, last but certainly not least, Kyla Bennet is at Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility. She's the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic Director and PEER's Director of Science Policy. She previously worked at EPA Region 1 for over 10 years as a wetland permit reviewer and as the region's wetlands enforcement coordinator. Welcome, Kyla. We're so happy to have you with us tonight. And without further ado, what I'd like to do is I would like to turn the conversation over to our first speaker of the evening, Adrian Esposito, the Executive Director at Citizens Campaign for the Environment. Adrian, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're delighted that you're here. And we're going to talk about PFAS. What is this chemical that has taken up so much energy and time in the news, and also is of concern for us from a public health vantage point? Go to the first slide. There we are. Now, I'm not going to give you a chemistry lesson because A, you don't want one, and actually you don't need one. I just want you to know, where do these chemicals come from? And that's a good question. So you might remember the old commercials when, you know, you could flip your eggs over on the Teflon pan and they don't stick. Or you could drop your French fries loaded with ketchup on the couch and it didn't stain. Or you wore certain types of clothing and that didn't stain. All of these common uses of PFAS, I'm sorry, you went too fast there. Go back. Thank you. All of these common uses of PFAS are what have made it so ubiquitous in our environment. So it was used to as a grease repellent, a stain repellent. It was used as coatings in consumer goods. It was used in Teflon. A little known fact too, and this is actually still occurring today, it was used and is being used in many areas still in coatings. When you go and you get your hamburger at the fast food place, well, we can't have your hamburger stick to the wrapper, right? Make a little chemical, has PFAS on it. Yes, that leaches off. Yes, there's more to that Big Mac than the pickles and the cheese. It's got a little Teflon in it from the wrapping as well. So these are all the different ways that this chemical gets into our air, our food, and our water. So I just wanted to clarify that. Also, the PFCs, as they're called, is a whole suite of chemicals. There's about 9,000 of them in that class of chemicals, but we're not going to talk about 9,000 because we don't want you to be here till Christmas. We're going to talk about two. We're going to talk about PFOA and PFO, which is PFOA and also PFAS. So, or PFOS, sorry. So those are the two just for tonight's topic. They're the two most common, but I just want you to know they're not the only two. I'm going to feel like the bearer of bad news. So you're going to have to bear with me on that. But then when Kyla goes, she'll just give you more bad news. So, okay. Next. Okay. I just wanted to mention this. Sometimes you're going to hear things about, well, there's the short chained one, and then there's the long chained, and the short chain chemicals break down more easily, so they're okay. Don't believe that. I just want you to know that there's so much study that needs to be done on these classification of chemicals that we can't say what is safer and what is not as of yet. The health effects, according to the EPA, of this classification of chemicals are really wide and varied. They cause things like lower birth weight. They cause a change in the liver enzymes. They cause increase, believe it or not, in cholesterol. But also they cause increase in kidney and testicular cancer. So there is no real studies that show they are safe. I just want to clarify that because sometimes, you know, you read things, they get confusing. Don't be confused. They're not safe. Next slide. Okay. Oops, I jumped. These are all things I already said. So let's go to the next slide. Okay. Also, a very common, unfortunately, source of the PFAS is in firefighting foam. And it is difficult to say PFAS firefighter foam, but I'm going to do it and do it several times here. When there was lots of training grounds, firefighters have to train for making sure that they have their skill set, making sure that they know exactly what to do when there's a fire. So the training centers were unknowingly using these firefighting foams with PFAS and exposing firefighters, but also then allowing those foams to act, seeping into the ground, acting as runoff into any kind of local stream or river or water body. So there were multiple exposures and continue to be associated with using the firefighting foam, whether it's to the firemen and women who are our first responders and fighting for us, and to the environment and drinking water and surface water sources. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the food packaging, incineration, it's left in the ash apparently, and also, of course, wastewater and industrial discharges as well. Just because something goes to a sewage treatment facility does not mean that it's filtered out after that effluent is treated. We are upgrading our sewage treatment plants in Connecticut these days, but to treat for PFAS, it must go through what's called a carbon filtration system, and wastewater treatment plants do not have those kinds of systems. Next. So what's going on in Connecticut? Well, we have some documented incidences. Some you've heard about in the news, others you may not have. But June 8th, 2021, accidental fire suppression system discharged releasing about 40,000 gallons of PFAS. And that's a considerable amount. Also, we've had this got a lot of press, so you probably heard about this one. It was either 20,000 gallons or more, escaped a containment system and found its way into the Farmington River. That got a lot of play in the paper. It went directly into the river untreated. And then we could test it and found that it was not dispersing. These are called the forever chemicals, which means, unfortunately, they accumulate, which means they build up in either the ecosystem or build up in the human system as well. Following the spill in the river, it was recorded and tested as high as 1.5 million parts per trillion. So I think that needs a context. The EPA has a goal of a health standard where we're not exposed to more than, now follow me on this, 0.70 PPT. 0.70. Oh, no, it's 70. Sorry, it's 70 parts per trillion. Sorry. I got confused with 1,4-dioxane for a minute. So the EPA has a non-binding health guidance standard of 70 parts per trillion. And in the river, we were finding 1.5 million parts per trillion. That is unfortunately very, very high and very devastating. So, of course, DEEP issued fishing and recreational bans and did soil and water and surface water testing because of that spill. Next. Okay. The other great problem, not only in Connecticut, but across America, unfortunately, is that this chemical, when it's on the surface, it seeps underground and can contaminate and does contaminate aquifer systems and private wells. So unfortunately, in Connecticut, there's about 400,000 people who drink from private wells. It's a lot of the state. In March 2021, DEEP did identify several private wells in Killingworth that were contaminated with PFAS. So they sampled more than 70 private wells, and 34 of them had concentrations over 10. 10 is, by the way, the New York State drinking water standard. Connecticut does not have a standard. The representative Steinberg will talk more about that. But to have 34 of the private wells having this contaminant, that is 50% of what was tested, about 45%. That is very high and very disturbing. DEEP, just this past August, identified 2,400 locations to be tested, including airports and fire stations and the firefighting training facilities, sewage treatment plants, and other industrial areas. So here we have Connecticut has more than 325,000 private wells, which means it's about 1/4 of the state's population. Now, I just want you to be aware, that's how many private wells there are. That means more people. That's the well. And if there's 3 or 4 people drinking from that private well, you can do the math. It's a lot of members of the public in the state of Connecticut drinking from private wells, most of which, the vast majority, have not been tested for PFAS or, frankly, for anything else. Private wells are not regulated by the EPA, and they are responsible for themselves to get tested, whether it's by, a contractor that they hire or some other way. So the good news is in 2022, Lou's very quick on the draw here. Governor Lamont's budget authorized a temporary investment of $2.3 million for private well testing. That we feel that's a very good step, and we're very happy about that. And we hope that, and we need for that to make it through the budget process. Okay, the state can set standards. We want you to know that. In New York State, they set the nation's strictest drinking water standard of 10 parts per trillion for PFOA and 10 parts per trillion for PFAS. Keep going. I'm going to have, actually, Kyla is going to talk about this, but we just want you to know yesterday, the EPA announced their plan to set a drinking water program in place for our nation. It's about 20 years late. And Kyla will talk more about why we feel this plan is a little bit anemic. I'll leave it at that. And I think I'm done. Am I done, Lou?
I think so.
Okay, so I think what happens now is Representative Jonathan Steinberg is going to talk about Connecticut and what he's doing in Connecticut to move us forward, make us safer, and work harder for cleaner water and a cleaner environment. Representative, it's all
Thank you,
yours.
Adrian. That was a wonderful level setting, so we all understand what we're dealing with here. And I remember back, I guess it's been 3 or 4 years, when we as a state were only just beginning to talk about PFAS and be concerned about it. There was a forum at the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, DEEP. I know Ann was there. And we had a number of people speaking about the chemistry and the problem it represented. I remember very distinctly the chemical industry saying, oh, there's nothing to worry about here. We don't use those particular variants of PFAS anymore. Everything's just fine. And then Connecticut had the, what you might describe as the galvanizing moments, the spill in the Farmington River and the airport. And suddenly we were all paying attention. And when I say all, I don't really mean all. I think there are probably still legislators who have no idea what PFAS is, even though we passed a bill last year. But it was really the moment in which we realized we had a problem on our hands that we had to do something about. And to their credit, DEEP immediately put together a working group to analyze the dimensions of the problem and to come up with recommendations that the legislature could act on that would hopefully lead to ameliorating this problem. And when I say ameliorate, it's because you really can't totally solve it. What you do with this stuff is still a problem. It's almost like nuclear waste. Once you have it, where do you put it? What do you do with it? And this is still an issue we have to deal with. But the legislature followed up on the recommendations, and COVID hit, and we lost an entire year. The legislation didn't move forward. The Public Health Committee, which I co-chair, and the Environment Committee were all ready to go, and then we lost a year. And that was a concern. That was a year with a measure of urgency in which we didn't act. But to everyone's credit, we picked up where we left off this past session and passed what I consider important legislation, not the end all by any stretch of the imagination. But it did two things. One is that it effectively banned the use of firefighting foam, Class B firefighting foam, which was the source of the 2 major spills that we had, and is perhaps the biggest single source of this PFAS chemical in use. And it basically forbade it. It has created a path for fire departments and other entities like airports to wean themselves off it in a safe manner, and hopefully also find alternatives that are going to work for them. It doesn't necessarily solve what we do with all that PFAS firefighting foam that we are no longer going to use, but it was a critical first step in really addressing what was an imminent issue in our state, and I would submit in virtually every other state in the nation, and is also used by the military and by others. But we went further, and this is really what I think is also very important. And again, not an end in itself. We started addressing the broad issue of PFAS in packaging. And as Adrian explained, it's everywhere. It is truly ubiquitous. It is part of our society. And in fact, the chemical industry argues that it is a permanent part of our society and there's nothing we can do about it. That's not much of an answer in my book, and I'm not surprised that's their answer. What we also did is that we have prohibited manufacturers and distributors from offering for safe or promotional purposes food packaging or packaging components which intentionally introduce PFAS. Intentionally is to give them a little wiggle room, but basically they know what they're doing. This is a chemical that is the chemical of first resort for so much of our packaging. We started with food packaging. It doesn't cover the entire waterfront, so to speak, and it puts us on a path to ban it, but I would argue that it's still on us to figure out how we're actually going to accomplish this. And it reminds me of a formal a former fight we had back in the day with GMOs, genetically modified organisms, where we really needed a multi-state consortium. And in fact, we still have this big issue right now with the Transportation Climate Initiative. Again, we need multiple states to come together in common purpose if we're going to have any impact. It's very difficult for a single state to have much of an impact on something that is so commercially available across so many different products. But Connecticut put a stake in the ground and said this was not acceptable. And I fully expect that we will go forward and ban other types of PFAS packaging going forward. But it's still upon us to figure out how we're going to do that. And we have a deadline built into the bill that's intended to put manufacturers on notice so that they are prepared to shift the products they use. It's also intended for all the end users to be aware of these products and to begin to look at alternatives. Often when we try to change away from plastics or other products, we hear that the alternatives are too expensive or are not available. The way we've gone about this is that we've given manufacturers and users plenty of time to figure out other ways of accomplishing their food packaging objectives without using this chemical. And I know that other states are trying as well. I think the next couple of years will be very interesting as we try to determine whether or not we have the critical mass necessary to really make this a movement. And oftentimes when you have a number of states acting in concert, finally the federal government starts to take action. And that is our ultimate hope, is that this is something that we don't have to do on a piecemeal basis, state by state, and that we actually take action on a federal basis. I can go on about some of the specifics of the bill, but that's the gist of it. It shows what one state can do. And we had the ultimate motivation of actual real problems. The real question is, what are other states going to do? And I'll hand it off now to Kyla.
Well,
I'm sorry, hand it off to Ann.
So before we do that, I'll go ahead and actually hand it off to Ann in just a minute. But I just wanted to take a moment and use my privilege as a moderator today to say thank you, Representative Steinberg. When the organizations first started working on this issue, in Connecticut, going back to, I remember we first got the call from DEEP in 2017, and we were looking for a sponsor, and Representative Steinberg was one of the first to step up, chair of the Public Health Committee, and champion this issue to try to make Connecticut a leader on addressing these these silent, ubiquitous, toxic chemicals. And so it took a little while to get it done, but we certainly couldn't have done it without your leadership and your support. So I just wanted to take a moment and give you that acknowledgement. And so with that, I'm going to, speaking of that legislation, pass it to a close friend and colleague, Ann Hulick at Clean Water Action, one of the lead advocates working to pass that legislation, to talk a little bit about what else the state of Connecticut is doing on PFAS. Ann, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Lou. Are you going to share my slides, or I can just talk through if, oh, there we go. Okay, so you can just skip to the next one. I'm going to talk very briefly about what's going on in Connecticut, thanks to the bill that was just signed into law this past legislative session, thanks to Representative Steinberg and many others, and then give a national update. But I just want to echo that what Lou just said. I'm the Connecticut Director of Clean Water Action. I've worked on environmental health policy now for the last 10 years. I coordinate the Coalition for a Safe and Healthy Connecticut. And I just want to personally thank, in front of all of the participants here, Jonathan Steinberg, who has been always my go-to and our go-to for advancing policies that protect public health and the environment. And I remember, Representative, we connected, I pulled you aside in the hallway of a summit meeting, and I said, I need to talk to you about introducing PFAS legislation. And it just went from there. So I want to thank you for your leadership. So as a result of the work that's been done in Connecticut. I am very pleased, and CCE has been our lead partner on this, that we passed a law this past legislative session to, as Representative Steinberg said, that had significant impacts for not only human health, but to our environment. And Connecticut is now on the map as a national leader. So what's going on right now, and I'm really proud of this, is that we didn't just say, let's ban firefighting foam or let's ban this or that. We said, how can we work with our firefighters and first responders and our agency folks to come up with realistic solutions? So right now in Connecticut, we are deep, I have to give them credit, and our firefighters and first responders are implementing a take-back program. So they are taking back all of this toxic firefighting foam, and they are storing it and very safely cleaning out all the trucks and the storage facilities, and substituting a new foam that the state and the emergency responders tested and agreed to use, which is a fluorine-free foam tested and approved by DEEP and by our emergency services, our airport authorities, and our first responders, that is actually Green Seal certified, which means that it is third-party certified to be green and effective. And these foams actually are used in multiple areas around the world. They just have not been used in the United States. So Connecticut has taken a lead on this, and we're really proud of that. DEEP is also ramping up identifying and testing of at-risk sites across the state. And Lou and other colleagues in our coalition lobbied hard for increased funding to our agencies so that they could do this monitoring and testing, which is so critical to protecting public health. And that has started and is ongoing, and we're going to need to continue to advocate for that. We're also reducing other sources of PFAS through other initiatives. And I bring this up because our coalition has worked on procurement policies with our Department of Administrative Services and our governor's office to establish procurement initiatives that reduce the use of PFAS in not only firefighting foam, but textiles and things like that. So there's many opportunities, even with local initiatives, that we can utilize and capitalize on to reduce these sources of pollution from PFAS. And we're taking a lead on that. And then our next steps going forward, as Representative Steinberg alluded to, is that this is the first step. We need to do more. Connecticut has definitely established its leadership on this issue, and we're very proud of that. But we're going to continue to work really hard and really collaboratively with our policymakers and our agency staff to think about next steps. So next steps in terms of, what about textiles? What about other sources of PFAS contamination? So next slide.
We have to reclaim a few minutes, and I want to leave the national portion for Kyla.
Right. I'm happy to do that, Lou, and thank you. So all I want to say is that we're really happy that we're working collaboratively with DEEP and our agencies to update and monitor the at-risk sources. And so, more More to follow, and we'll work with our policymakers like Representative Steinberg to make sure that we're continuing this work in Connecticut and beyond. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to you, Lou.
Thank you, Anne. I appreciate you covering that for us this evening. It's helpful to know, and definitely lots more to come from DEEP and DPH on this issue. So we'll keep folks posted on those items as well. So I now want to turn the conversation over to our guest speaker, Kyla Bennet, Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lou. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Good. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is why Connecticut has to take strong action on PFAS. It sounds to me like you guys are doing great things, but you need to do more. As you heard from Adrian and the other speakers, PFAS is of huge concern. It's a national crisis. And unfortunately, EPA is not going to save us. Yesterday, EPA released its PFAS strategic roadmap. It's their commitments to action 2021 to 2024, but there was virtually nothing of substance in this roadmap except a promise to maybe regulate 2 of the 9,252 PFAS that exist, PFOA and PFOS, the 2 that Adrian talked about in the first talk. And it promises to do this in about a year. We still have no information whatsoever on what limit they're going to place on these 2 substances in drinking water. The roadmap also relies very heavily on voluntary stewardship, which I'll talk about a little bit more, and still uses the whack-a-mole approach to regulation. In other words, looking at 1 compound at a time, which if we do that, we'll be doing this for the next 100 years or so. So we have literally been waiting decades for federal regulation of PFOA and PFOS, just those 2. And I'm just going to give you a little brief history. In 1998, 3M, one of the big manufacturers of PFAS, told EPA that PFOS builds up in human blood and causes liver damage in rats. In '99, EPA audited those studies. In 2001, attorney Rob Bilott, and if you haven't seen the movie Dark Waters, I strongly urge you to see it. It's a movie about Rob Bilott and his action in West Virginia, where he sued DuPont to save a town. Attorney Bilott provided EPA with some DuPont documents on PFOA that showed how very hazardous they are and how DuPont knew about that. In 2001, 3M gave EPA even more evidence of toxicity of PFOS. And then in 2005, there was even more evidence coming forward. In 2006, EPA's Scientific Advisory Board said that PFOA is a likely human carcinogen. So think about this for a minute. This is 2006 when EPA was told that it's a likely human carcinogen, and we still do not have drinking water standards for this pervasive chemical that's everywhere in the country. In 2009, EPA published a provisional health advisory for PFOA and PFOS saying 200 parts per trillion, you shouldn't have more than that. They issued their first PFAS action plan under the Obama administration in 2009. And in that, they stated that they intended to consider initiating TSCA Section 6 rulemaking. TSCA is the Toxic Substances Control Act. That is the act that basically regulates all of these chemicals. They didn't do it. In 2012, EPA issued an unregulated contaminant monitoring rule requiring all the towns across the country to look at 6 PFAS and see how many were in the water. They were trying to get a grasp of how bad the contamination was. Unfortunately, they used really high detection limits, about 120 parts per trillion for these 6. And as others have told you, we are regulating this stuff down to the parts per trillion. New York has 10. Massachusetts, where I'm from, we have 20 parts per trillion for 6. So a sum of 20 parts per trillion for 6 PFAS. And California is just put a bill forward saying that they want to regulate PFOA in the parts per quadrillion. In 2016, EPA came out with an unbinding lifetime health advisory for PFOA and PFOS of 70 parts per trillion. In other words, you should not have more than 70 parts per trillion in your water every day for your life. Most people have a lot more than that. In 2019, under the Trump administration, the second PFAS action plan is released, and they promised to regulate those 2 PFAS in drinking water by the end of the year. Guess what? Didn't happen. 2006, EPA did a voluntary stewardship program. You'll often hear people say, oh, but PFOA and PFOS has been banned. It was not banned. EPA used this voluntary stewardship program, and they talked to the 8 biggest manufacturers of these 2 chemicals and said, can you please stop making this stuff? So they said, okay, we'll stop making it. But that didn't mean that they had to stop using it. And it didn't mean that they couldn't import it. And all they did was tweak the formula and make these regrettable substitutions, which is how this voluntary stewardship program brought us thousands of new PFAS chemicals. We are still finding PFOA and PFOS everywhere. Why? Because it hasn't been banned. You can still import it, you can still use it, and so many of these chemicals will recombine to form PFOA and PFOS. Here's an example. This is a billboard that's actually outside a Chemours plant. Chemours is one of the manufacturers, and it says, let's change the formula. And that's what they do. Every time a state takes an action to regulate one of these chemicals, they tweak the formula and put a new one out that's not regulated. EPA also very quietly released its testing strategy yesterday. It's buried on the website. It wasn't in their press release. And this testing strategy has this little graphic in there. And what it's telling you is that there are all these chemicals, and they are only going to be looking at 24 PFAS, 24 out of 9,252. And one of the reasons that they're only looking at 24 is because they can't even identify the manufacturers of all of these chemicals. So here's a nice little pie chart. EPA is testing 24 out of 9,252. This is what we call the whack-a-mole approach. It's way too slow, and meanwhile, we're all dying. It's not the right thing to do. We have to regulate PFAS as a class. The reason that PFAS must be regulated as a class is that there are far too many. They all share this carbon-fluorine bond, which is one of the strongest bonds known to humans. It's practically impossible to destruct. So therefore, they are all persistent. Many of them, not all, but many of them are bioaccumulative, and many are toxic. I have not met a PFAS yet that's not toxic. I guess it's possible that one of those 9,252 is not toxic, but we haven't seen it yet. One by one will simply take too long. There's also a fight over the definition of PFAS. EPA's definition, and I'm not going to give you a chemistry lesson here. I'm not a chemist, I'm an ecologist and a lawyer. EPA's definition is too broad. It's not awful, but it's too broad. And it's much broader than the OECD definition, which is being used by many countries around the world. But the state's definition is even better. All of the states who are starting to regulate PFAS are saying a PFAS is a chemical substance with one fully fluorinated carbon atom. It's simple, it's easy, and it's inclusive, and it's the right thing to do. So why are the states right? We have to use the precautionary principle. And if you haven't heard of this before, the precautionary principle says that we must adopt precautionary measures when scientific evidence about an environmental or human health hazard is uncertain and the stakes are high. The stakes here are extremely high. I have firefighter clients who have cancer from the PFAS in their turnout gear. I know people who are very, very sick from PFAS contamination, who live in these fence line communities next to these manufacturers, like down in Cape Fear, North Carolina. It's horrific. It is a national crisis. The stakes are extremely high and human health is at risk. So why else is EPA problematic? First of all, I know there's a lot of acronyms here. I'm just going to go through them really quickly. The first one, CBI, stands for confidential business information. EPA allows manufacturers to say, oh, nobody can hear about this chemical or know what the formula is or know where we manufacture it even, because that's confidential business information. And we're too afraid that someone's going to steal our money-making chemical, so nobody can know that information. So the public does not know where some of these facilities are. We don't know what they're manufacturing or even the addresses of facilities where they're manufacturing them because of CBI. CBI, okay, in some cases it might be important, but for many of these chemicals, it's being abused, and it's keeping information under this cloak of secrecy so that we don't know what's going on. The other problem is NCD, EPA's New Chemicals Division. EPA's New Chemical Division, according to EPA's release yesterday, is the gatekeeper. They are the ones who are protecting protecting the public from all of these horrible chemicals that might be coming out on the market. And I'm going to talk about why the New Chemicals Division isn't helping us in just a minute, after I just explain DOD, which is the Department of Defense. As you can probably imagine, the Department of Defense is responsible for many of these contamination problems around the country, and they are fighting very hard with EPA to keep the regulatory limits low so that they don't have to pay for cleanup. So let's go back to NCD, the New Chemicals Division. Here, we have clients, more than 5, who work at EPA. Many of them either currently work or did work in the New Chemicals Division. And this is a list of articles, 5 of them so far, that have come out in The Intercept, articles by Sharon Lerter. They have disclosed that there is incredible corruption in the New Chemicals Division. It's a very, very troubled division of EPA. Industry has captured this division of the agency. And what happens is the managers in this division are actually altering risk assessments to ensure that these chemicals get out on the market, even though they are presenting risk to human health and the environment. Here's another example of why we can't trust EPA, the PFAS map. In 2019, EPA stated it had a map of all the facilities that may be handling PFAS, but they didn't release it. So we FOIA'd for it. We did a Freedom of Information Act request. They wouldn't give it to us. So we sued and we won. And we finally got the data in July of 2021, just this summer. And EPA didn't make a map, but we made one for them. This is based on EPA's data. And this is a map of all of the facilities in the United States that may be handling PFAS. You can't even see the country. Here's Connecticut. Connecticut has about 800 facilities that EPA suspects is handling PFAS. I think this map is a vast underestimate of what's really going on, not just in Connecticut, but throughout the country. And just so you know, this map of Connecticut has yet to be seen. So this is brand new. We just released this yesterday. One of the reasons I think it's a vast underestimate is because of something that we alluded to earlier, fire stations. It's not just the foam. Everybody knows that there's PFAS in foam, and a lot of states are taking action to get rid of we call it AFFF foam, the foam that has PFAS in it. But the problem is that the turnout gear, and that's this stuff, the gear that these firefighters have to put on and wear every single day when they go to work, this gear has PFAS in the parts per billion in it. There are 3 ways that PFAS can get into a human body. You can ingest it through water or food. You can breathe it through inhaling, but it can also be dermally absorbed. And firefighters are dying at an alarming rate. In 2019, 75% of online firefighter duty deaths were due to cancer. 75%. These are our frontline heroes, and we should not be putting them through this. I just want to mention before we get off the firefighters that the reason we can't get PFAS out of their gear is because there's a nonprofit standard setting agency here in Massachusetts called the National Fire Protection Association, which has a standard requiring PFAS to be in their gear. We have appealed and tried to get them to get it out, but because the standard setting agencies are the manufacturers themselves, the industry themselves are the ones voting for these standards, they voted against getting it out. Guess why? Money. PFAS cycle, as others have alluded to, it doesn't go away. When a manufacturer makes something that has PFAS in it, it can get into the air through emissions. It can get into the water from discharges to from NIPT's discharges. When it goes into consumers' homes, it's in makeup. If you wash your face, it goes down your drain into your septic system or into the sewer, and it's constantly cycled around, and it can never be destroyed. This is what states are doing. This is a really nice map from the group Safer States. You can see which states are doing things, mostly the East Coast and the West Coast, but states are trying to fill that void that EPA has left. EPA has left a regulatory void. They have abandoned us. They're not going to help us anytime soon. So states like Connecticut have to, unfortunately, step up to the plate and make these laws themselves. So what Connecticut needs to do is they need to define PFAS as a class, and preferably they need to use this definition that everyone else is using in states, one fully fluorinated carbon. It's easy, it's all encompassing, and it works. Again, it may capture some things that aren't as dangerous, but isn't that better than leaving out the ones that are giving us cancer? That's where the precautionary principle comes in. They need a very strong drinking water standard. Maximum contaminant level. As I said earlier, here in Massachusetts, we have 20 parts per trillion for 6. So for the sum of 6, 20 parts per trillion. It's pretty good. Mass DEP is doing a really good job. I'd like it to be stronger, and we're pushing them to make it stronger. California is trying to do this parts per quadrillion, which would be great if it passes. Connecticut should ban PFAS in all consumer products, not just textiles or food packaging, but in everything. In makeup, in pesticides, it's in artificial turf. I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but in Woodbury, Connecticut, they put an artificial turf field in, and the levels of PFAS in the adjacent waterway went up as soon as they put it in. They're trying now to get the manufacturer to take it out, but they're saying, well, you can't prove that PFAS came from our field. It did, but it's hard to prove. So ban PFAS in artificial turf. Ban the use of PFAS-contaminated biosolids. Biosolids contain tens of thousands of parts per trillion of PFAS because basically it's human waste and we're excreting it. Almost 99% of people in the world have PFAS in their blood serum. So when it's in your body, you excrete it when you drink water, when you eat food that's contaminated with PFAS, it comes out in your waste. When it goes to the wastewater treatment plant, the biosolids are made from dried waste, and then farmers put it on their field and it's taken back up into the plants again and getting back into your water. So it's this endless cycle. Ban it. Ban the use of PFAS in turnout gear. Please, I beg you to please take care of your firefighters. Not only will it help your firefighters, but imagine each and every one of these fire stations have PFAS in their gear. And guess where they wash their gear? They wash it at the fire stations in these big commercial machines. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. You should also require manufacturers to disclose. They should have labels that say, this product contains PFAS. And you should sue the manufacturers. Absolutely, your attorney general should sue the manufacturers. It's happening in other states. It should happen in Connecticut. This is a picture of me and my husband. We dressed up as PFOA and Trump's EPA 2 years ago. And I'm afraid, unfortunately, that we're probably going to have to reuse these costumes because it's unfortunately not much better under the Biden administration. And the last thing I want to say about that turnout gear is that Dr. Graham Peasley from Notre Dame University has been working on this. And he said if you take one set of turnout gear, jacket and pants, and throw it into an Olympic-sized swimming pool, that within hours, every molecule of water, 660,000 gallons, will be contaminated over the EPA's lifetime health advisory. So think about it. Every fire station in your state is washing that gear. It is going into your water, either into septic systems, groundwater, drinking water, or into wastewater treatment plants where it's then getting put in drinking water as well. So please, please consider banning PFAS in your turnout gear. And that is my talk.
Thank you, Kyla, for sharing that with us. It's, wow, really unnerving. And yet for those of us that have been studying this issue for some time, somewhat unsurprising. The maps that you showed today paint a picture that there's almost nowhere to run to and nowhere to hide when it comes to PFAS in our water, which is a really kind of disturbing premise. And so we really appreciate everything that you shared with us today. I think I speak for all of the panelists today when I say that I learned something new in just about every minute of your presentation. So, so that was great. What I'd like to do now, we have a number of questions, and we want to hear from our attendees today. There's actually a number of great questions here, and we have a number of really incredible attendees, some partners of ours. There's some agency folks on the line today. So I want to say thank you to everybody. Please go ahead and drop your questions in the chat. I'm going to start with Joni Adas. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I'm sorry if I've butchered your name. Corvetta, formerly DuPont, is the patent holder for PFAS and has been in lawsuits for their gross negligence with this chemical. They're currently the owners of Remington Woods, 420 acres in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and are considering developing the woods. In what ways can we hold them accountable for the harm they have done to the global community and continue to do on our poorest communities? Thank you for that question. Joni, Kyla, since you just coming off the floor, do you want to take the first stab at answering that?
Sure. So it's a difficult situation. I think what you really need to do is not allow that property to be developed unless and until it's cleaned up, and cleaning it up might be impossible. Because the reason I'm saying don't develop it is because PFAS can be inhaled and dermally absorbed and ingested. So you don't want to put anything on a site where people are going to be exposed to that. You need to talk to your attorney general and get them to sue the manufacturers like so many other states are. It really is the only answer. In many states around the country, we have the municipalities joining class action suits and suing over their drinking water. So they're suing 3M and DuPont and Chemours and Dow and all of the companies that make this stuff. But that's a different thing. We really need the AGs of all these states to go after these companies for the contamination that they caused. But nobody should be building on a site that's that contaminated.
Anne, did you want to follow up? I think I saw a hand there.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I would just say there's a lot of work being done on that site, and our Attorney General, William Tong, is very much engaged on the PFAS issue. He has been right along. He has a whole team of attorneys working on this, and not to say that what Kyla brought up is not right at all. I think it's right, but work with your local officials. There's a petition going around. Contact DEEP. Work with your state representatives and senators. There's many avenues. Many of us are aware of this issue right now. Reach out to Lou and I. It's not just PFAS, you know, with respect to Remington Woods. There's a whole host of issues. So feel free to reach out. We can help you. And I just want to assure you that our Attorney General was one of the first Attorney Generals in the country to sign on to a letter with 22 other AGs to hold manufacturers responsible for pollution. So we have his support. Let's use it. Let's use our policymakers like Representative Steinberg and others, and work collaboratively together to make sure we're addressing these issues. I'm also aware very much of the artificial turf issue in Woodbridge. That is, you know, that's very much right now at the local level, but the residents there are doing a really good job to raise awareness with local officials. So these are the things, as Kyla mentioned, that we can lift up to our state representatives, like Jonathan and others, to say, we want to ban these materials to reduce additional sources of contamination to our environment. So reach out to Lou and I think, you know, we've been very much on top of all these issues for many, many years now. We're happy to help.
Thank you, Anne. So there's a few other questions here. Patricia Taylor asked a question. Oh, so this is for Kyla. So I want to give some of our other panelists a chance to speak up as well. So I'll come back to this question next.
No, I think we should ask this question. I get this question all the time at the office. I'm dying to see what Kyla has to say.
So the question
Not gonna lie.
So the question is, what should Connecticut do with AFF foam it has taken back? It has been suggested to incinerate it. Is this safe?
Nope, not safe. When you incinerate, PFAS is so indestructible that EPA actually put out a reward earlier this year to give $50,000 to anyone who could figure out how to destroy it. Somebody won, but we haven't figured out any large-scale ways to do it. This is part of the problem. It's all hazardous waste. If you burn it in whatever community, like a lot of states were shipping it out to Ohio, and it's just getting into the air and getting deposited over there. So you're just harming someone else. It has to be stored someplace safely until such time as we can figure out how to destroy it safely, because it's just not possible yet. We don't have the technology. And somebody had mentioned about the, you know, you cleaned the trucks. I have some firefighter clients, and one of them told me that in Australia, they have to use a 32-step process to decontaminate the trucks, because PFAS is so sticky that it will, in some cases, we may have to treat the trucks themselves as hazardous waste because we simply can't get it out of the trucks. So that's how dangerous this stuff is. Hold it someplace safe until we figure this out.
Yeah, excellent point. I would just add to that, that the one good thing, well, one of the good things that EPA announced yesterday is that they want to have the class of PFAS categorized as hazardous waste. So that sets up a whole nother cascade of environmental protections for these chemicals that I think is a very good thing. To Kyla's point, we do not support incineration of firefighting foam, and our DEEP knows that.
Okay, if no other comments, we'll move on to Wendy Bateau's question. What is the best way local municipalities can take responsibility and action? In Westport, a couple of years ago, we passed an ordinance banning single-use plastics by certain food organizations. Would this have perhaps caused the increased use of PFAS packaging? Can towns prohibit this use, or is that reserved for the state legislature?
Well, I'll jump in on that one. I do not believe that banning, you know, any ordinances that ban single-use plastic bags, you know, has caused an increase in PFAS packaging. I think those two are very, very much unrelated. You know, as an organization that has been intricately related in passing plastic bag bans throughout the nation, the objective there was just to have people bring their own bag, and I think that is what has occurred. But the question really is, what's the best way that local municipalities can take responsibility and take action? I mean, I think it really does help when local government gets involved. And local government can influence state government. So we have been working in areas in Connecticut, New York, to have local ordinances passed in local municipalities, whether it's a village, a county, a town, that would support state action. So that's one way for local municipalities to use their voice and to generate and demonstrate support. One of the things that occurs, I think, a lot of times is people who might call their local you know, county or their town and ask about problems with drinking water. And the towns and the counties don't have the means and the finances nor the infrastructure to help that person. It really has to be done on the state level, particularly in Connecticut, That's why we really are happy to see that funding that was allocated in the budget to test for PFAS in private wells. That's one way state government can help. But when local government raises their voice, then that helps get these kinds of programs into action on the books and implemented.
Ann?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I would just add that one of the things that we've been working on in Connecticut, and Lou is very familiar with this, is we've been working on procurement. We've worked with the governor's office and the Department of Administrative Services, and more recently with Sustainable CT, which is a platform for municipalities to adopt policies and initiatives that are more sustainable, one of which is procurement. So we worked with our Department of Administrative Services at the state level to restrict PFAS and flame retardants in years past in many products. And we're currently working with Sustainable CT to restrict other chemicals, PFAS included, in product categories like turf, like cookware, like furniture, like textiles that are bought for towns. So that's another way, if any of you are involved with your local municipal leaders and your towns are involved with Sustainable CT, we've done webinars and we've shared kind of guidelines and language, best practices with towns so that they can adopt these policies and these purchasing agreements that are in line with restricting PFAS chemicals. So there's a number of initiatives that ways that you all can be really helpful in addressing this in your own town, your own communities.
Jonathan, anything you wanted to add to that?
I've been monitoring Wendy's additional comments, and to her point, we're all very proud that we've also banned plastic straws and other materials. But her last question, I think, is also pertinent in the sense of what is it that we can do. She's asked whether there's state preemption of taking action on PFAS. And we do limit municipalities in a number of ways. We only delegate certain responsibilities. But to my knowledge, and I saw Ann shaking her head as well, there are no such restrictions in this context. The challenge, and I would again turn to Ann and Sustainable Connecticut, is to find reasonable ways to move forward that the community will accept, that businesses will accept, so you can actually start down that path. And I think that we're all pioneering as we go here. But I'm very pleased to hear that many municipalities in other states are already making progress in this way.
Great. So there's a lot of really appreciative comments here. Folks seem to be getting a lot out of the webinar.
Which we appreciate.
Absolutely. I got a question from Susan Eastwood, who works with Sierra Club here in Connecticut. Are there any tests available or in development for groundwater near a source of PFAS contamination, such as an incinerator ash landfill? And they are dealing with a proposal to expand an ash landfill in Putnam, Connecticut. So I know that there's going to be a lot of folks that are going to be interested to hear about this. Kyla, do you have any response to that question?
Yeah, there are testing methods, nothing that you can do yourself at home. You know, you can't go to Home Depot and buy a $50 test. Testing for PFAS is very, very expensive. And the lab that we use, which is one of the best ones in the world, is Eurofins in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And even though Eurofins is everywhere, we use the one in Pennsylvania in Lancaster because they have the machines that can do really good detection limits, and they can now test for 70 PFAS out of 9,252. But there are also other tests you can do, something called total organic fluorine, which is indicative but not determinative. So it will tell you how much fluorine is in there, and most fluorine is from PFAS, not all of them. So it's a little bit broader. You might capture some things that aren't PFAS in there, but you have to use one of those labs. It's very expensive. So to do a test, for example, for the 70 PFAS at Eurofins, it's about $750 for one sample, and then you have to do a field blank. So you're talking over $1,000 per sample. So it is unfortunately expensive, but it is doable.
And I just want to add to that too. Not every lab has the PFAS and PFOA testing technology. And then when they do have it, you have to be smart enough to say, what is your limit of detection? So I look at water data, constantly for a living. And so sometimes for the PFAS or PFOA, it'll say ND, non-detect. So then I have to go back and call whoever whether it was the water supplier or health agency, and say, well, what was the limit of detection? And a lot of times they're still using 40 parts per trillion. And so they'll report that there was no detection. And then you find out that's not really relevant anymore in today's society. But in fairness to them, they're like, that's all our lab equipment can do. So even the good ones in New York State, they have detection down to 2 PPT. And that's why I'm very interested in what's going on in California. I'm not sure there's that much readily available equipment that can test in the quadruplets. I don't even know if I said that correctly. So, the technology for testing has to catch up to the health science, and it has to move along together. We do have, now testing down to 2 PPT, but if we're going to have standards that are lower than that, we have to be able to send samples out to laboratories that can readily test for lower than that too. So it's just another challenge with this particular suite of chemicals.
Great point. Great point. So there's a few more questions here. We've gone a little bit over, but I want to just cover at least one or two more of these. Got a question from Sharon Lewis, who's another friend and colleague, executive director at the Coalition for Economic and Environmental Justice. Thanks so much for joining us, Sharon. Sharon says, I'm very concerned about the environmental justice implications. There are more fires in urban areas. There are more fast food establishments. Consuming fish from contaminated waters is common. Regional incinerators and landfills are in EJ communities. Artificial turf is common at urban ball fields. This seems to be impossible to eradicate. What can we do to stop the harmful human health and environmental impacts? Is there a citizen science type testing method? And I saw a hand up from you. Why don't we start with you?
Well, I would just say thank you to my friend and colleague Sharon for raising this. I felt a little bad that we didn't get into this a little bit more deeply because this is absolutely 100% an environmental justice issue. These chemicals are manufactured in EJ communities, and they will continue to be so unless we, really put the brakes on this. And so the residents in those fence line communities are exposed from production to use to incineration and beyond. And we have to talk about that. So I don't know that there is a citizen science opportunity, but I think that is a really good question that is worth exploring. And Kyla may know more about this because we talk about chemicals and plastic and climate. PFAS is just one of those class of chemicals in that, like, Adrian, I'm going to use your word, that suite, that they're all linked. When we are producing PFAS chemicals, those production facilities are not only emitting toxic chemical gases, but they are emitting carbon emissions. So this is a huge environmental justice and a climate justice issue. And I thank Sharon for bringing this up. We could have a whole nother panel on this aspect of this. So we
Yeah.
need to have more conversation. Kyla, I'd love to hear from you on this.
It's a great point, and Sharon is absolutely right. And in fact,
Mhm.
the data that we got from EPA through that FOIA actually shows how many facilities are within 3 miles of environmental or EJ communities. So you can actually measure how many there are, but it is a huge problem. The one thing I know, I've spent all night slamming EPA, but the one good thing I can say about Administrator Regan is that he is very concerned about environmental justice. So I think that what you should do is contact your federal legislators and talk to them about this. There's actually in the Senate tomorrow in Washington, D.C., there's a hearing on PFAS. So you should contact your Connecticut senators and ask them to talk about this question, because those fence line communities are absolutely at more risk, and it's despicable.
So I just want to chime in too, as much as I agree with, you know, the EPA has not been a fireball on this particular issue, but it is true. A couple of months ago, maybe 2 months ago, I had a Zoom meeting with an EPA person who wanted feedback on how we thought they were doing in, you know, social justice issues. And we gave them an earful and said, we don't think they were doing anything on social justice issues, and that, you know, they needed to start somewhere, and gave them, you know, a list of suggestions. So at least they had a person who was reaching out, who was listening. That was the first time I've been doing this work. It's almost embarrassing to say, but 35 years. It's the first time anybody's ever called me from the EPA to say, how are we doing and how can we do better? So at least I felt a little bit encouraged by that. I know it's not much, but I just wanted to throw it in for balance.
That's very fair. So, and with that, I'm going to open it up to any of our other panelists who want to get in their kind of last word. We're nearing the 8:20 mark, and so I want to let folks go pretty soon. So
I'll just make one remark. This is really, really serious. This is a hair on fire moment that has not penetrated the consciousness of the vast majority of Americans. And you know, if we were to stop it today, when we talk about carbon emitting, it's like, how long does it take to
Right.
clear the atmosphere and the like? We don't even have a plan for what we're going to do with these chemicals if we could collect them, if we could sequester them. The first thing we have to do is stop them, stop using them. And the fact that there are thousands of them out there, that they have become part and parcel of our consumer economy, makes it a tremendous challenge. And we all bear a responsibility, just like with climate change. It starts at the individual level to stop using these products, to tell retailers that we will not buy these products. We need to make this a grassroots movement, because command and control, as we've seen at the federal level, is not a solution in and of itself.
I agree with you totally, Jonathan. And one last, and your analogy to climate change is spot on. If we stopped emitting PFAS tomorrow, it's still going to take us decades, if not hundreds of years, to clean it up because of the persistence and the half-life of these chemicals. But one caution that I want to put out there is beware of things that you read or hear. The industry has this playbook. They will tell you they're not carcinogenic. They can't be absorbed by your skin. They're not all bad. The short chain ones are safe. Fluoropolymers are safe. It's all BS. It is all BS. I'm telling you that right now. Don't listen to it. We're being prevented from figuring out what these things are, but everyone we've seen has problems. Just the fact that they're all persistent is a problem. Under TSCA, under EPA's statute that deals with toxic chemicals, if they're persistent, they are automatically supposed to be dealt with differently. And every single one is persistent. Don't listen to people who say that we're wrong.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'll just take a moment to say, you know, thank you to everybody who joined us today. Great questions from the attendees. Special thank you to all of our panelists. I know I certainly got a lot out of today's conversation. I hope everyone did as well. I just want to remind everyone that one of the reasons that we do this is because, really the most important part of the work that we do is to educate the public on these issues. But that said, as they say, with knowledge, there's a responsibility to act. So while we appreciate everyone coming to the conversation, I encourage you all to take this information, share it with your friends and your family and your coworkers, and to also look for opportunities to start those conversations with your local representatives, and with whether it be the folks that you work for. This is how we actually make change happen on a grassroots level, and it happens step by step, piece by piece. It doesn't happen overnight, as this issue is a testament. But again, really appreciate everyone being with us tonight. Thank you so much for spending your time with us, and we will be sending this out to all of the attendees. So we encourage you to share it on social media with your friends, and keep in touch with us. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Have a good night.
Bye.